This is the story of the only president in the EU who has publicly supported the Kremlin after the annexation of Crimea. He called the Russian aggression in Ukraine a civil war and compared Ukrainians to ultranationalist leader Stepan Bandera. Some protest against him and accuse of overindulging in alcohol. Others strongly support him, and his ratings continue to grow. Milos Zeman is the Czechs' first head of state elected by direct vote and not in parliament. But who is he in reality? We are about to uncover the unknown history of the president and what is meant by the term the Czech Donbass. Why did this constituency support Zeman, and what really binds him with Russia's President Putin? It was one of the largest protests in the Czech Republic in quarter of a century. About 30,000 people in Prague came out to show symbolic red cards to President Zeman and threw eggs at him. Czechs have been rallying against Zeman since the start of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Activists even stripped naked outside the presidential administration. They hang out red underwear instead of the presidential standard and handcuff themselves to the fence of the Russian embassy.
Zeman, he is destroying the reputation of the Czech Republic in the world by supporting Putin because Putin is the aggressor in the war in Ukraine.
Milos Zeman is the only European head of state who denies Russia's invasion of Donbass in the east of Ukraine. He says this is a civil war and calls Ukrainians Banderites. The Czech president openly supports the Kremlin.
I am completely sure that sanctions are only there for a short term. I publicly spoke out against these sanctions. We know. Milos Zeman, Czech Republic's third president, the first president to be elected by popular vote, in retirement for 10 years prior to the election, former prime minister, founder and honorary chairman of the Party of Civic Rights.
Zeman is not afraid of popular outrage and declares this publicly.
I am not scared of you, just as I was not scared 25 years ago. Shame.
To understand why the Czech president is not afraid of his people and how Russia is creating a network of lobbyists in Europe, we should rewind back a quarter of a century. 25 years before the Red Card protests, Milos Zeman also stood in Prague in front of a mass rally, but then in a different role. Back then, thousands of people supported him. That was the time of the Velvet Revolution, student protests that toppled the Czechoslovak communist regime. Then, Zeman was on a wave of popularity. A scientist and publicist, he won national renown by his criticism of the Soviet Moscow's regime.
In the field of technological development, we are at the same level as Algeria and Peru, far behind Portugal.
It is the memory of that Zeman, a charismatic dissident and revolutionary, which will largely sway the vote when he will be running for president. But this will happen only a quarter of a century later. After the Velvet Revolution of 1989, three leaders came to the fore on the Czech political arena: Václav Havel, Václav Klaus and Milos Zeman. Right after the revolution, the Czech Republic was headed by the revolutionary and dissident Václav Havel, whose rapid reforms brought the country to the world's attention. He remained in office for 2 terms. The political career of Milos Zeman also flourished. In the 1990s, he headed the Czech Social Democratic Party and made it the most influential one in the country. Then he became chairman of the lower house of parliament, before finally becoming prime minister. However, Zeman lost the presidential election of 2003 to Václav Klaus, not least because of a conflict within his own party. Following the defeat, Zeman retires from politics for 7 years, before creating the Party of Civic Rights. Then comes another setback. As the party fails to overcome the parliamentary election threshold, Zeman again retires from politics. He goes into retreat at his country home, and over the following 10 years, almost nothing is heard of him.
He retired in the Bohemian Moravian highlands. He started drinking and eating more than before. Alcohol, age and psychological trauma led to what he has now.
While the ex-politician is living in seclusion, Russian business is booming in the Czech Republic, and Kremlin oligarchs are thriving. This is the castle of Mostov, founded in the 14th century. Kremlin oligarch Yuri Lushkov rented this castle for his festivities when he was mayor of Moscow. That's according to Natalia Makovic, a Belarusian immigrant and owner of a castle real estate agency.
As a special order for the Moscow mayor, the owner of the castle got knights to take part in jousting tournaments, organized medieval banquets and various parties. Allegedly, Mr. Lushkov hunted here and, of course, golfed, since there is a golf course nearby.
When the Moscow oligarch stopped renting the castle, its owner went bankrupt because he couldn't find such rich clients anymore, Natalia says. But a mere 10 minutes away from Moscow, there is a city where the presence of Russian money can be easily seen, and heard too.
In the Czech Republic, Karlovy Vary is often called a Russian town. Ads and posters are in Russian here, and walking through the central square, it was only 3 times that I heard the Czech language spoken. It seems like everyone here is from Russia. Let's check it out. Hello, excuse me, are you from Russia?
Yes, so?
This is Moskovska Street. The offers range from fishing to massage and spa treatment. For the last 10 years, Russia's business presence here has been growing and didn't stop even when the EU imposed sanctions on Moscow. The signs are in Russian, though the prices are European, but the Russian tourists can't be bothered.
Russia isn't afraid of the sanctions, absolutely, but the high exchange rate of the euro, that's bothersome.
Have there been fewer tourists since sanctions were imposed?
Yes, definitely. A lot of Russians came here, including officials. Gazprom owns hotels here, but now officials don't come.
We don't give a damn about these sanctions. For centuries, Russians always came to Karlovy Vary. The grass is greener on the other side.
The secrets of Kremlin's influence on the Czech president could lie behind this fence.
The town of Nové Veselí is approximately 150 kilometers from Prague. According to the address, this is the president's country house. The fence isn't bulletproof, it's wooden and shorter than my height.
Despite the modesty of this presidential property by Ukrainian standards, the Czech media maintain that this is a 16th century castle and a cultural heritage. It's here that Zeman might have changed his attitude to the Kremlin. That's according to a representative of Russian minority in a Czech government council.
He is very resentful, and people around him use it to their advantage. These people are connected to Gazprom and other institutions.
What is the connection between Gazprom and the Czech president? Did Moscow get Prague hooked on Russian gas supplies? And how do Kremlin agents use politicians? According to Czech journalists, one of Zeman's few friends who stood by him in the years of solitude was former sponsor of his political party during elections, Colonel Zdeněk Zbytek. Like Zeman, he had also lost his career. After the revolution, the colonel was kicked out of the army because he had allegedly wanted to allow communist tanks into Prague. The colonel denies this, but for over 25 years the media have held it against him.
I assure you from all the army representatives that we in the military regiments and divisions of the Czech People's Army will help you whenever you will need it, where you will need it the most, on your farms and in the fields.
This footage is from 1989, and this is Colonel Zdeněk Zbytek today.
I spoke as the commander of the 1st Tank Division. The tanks are where they have to be, in the barracks.
Zdeněk Zbytek, graduate of the Academy of the General Staff of the USSR, head of the Russian club at the Russian Embassy, former commander of the Tank Division stationed near Prague, dismissed from the army.
For 25 years they said I wanted to send tanks to Prague, but if somebody says it now, I'll win any court case. Although nothing was said directly, he was practically the only one from the army who publicly said anything in those days. I remember Colonel Zbytek. He said the army is on the side of the people and is ready to protect their interests at any time. They would give us an order and we would break up all the students right away.
Colonel Zbytek was dismissed from the army by former Czechoslovak Minister of Defense Luboš Dobrovský.
Luboš Dobrovský, former Czechoslovak Minister of Defense, director of the office of the first Czech President Václav Havel, former Czech ambassador in Moscow.
Evil man, hateful, biased.
But did you forgive him?
No, for me, Dubrovsky is nobody, just an old man. This is a person who studied in the Soviet military schools, a former army commander, a colonel. Now he does business on the Russian territory.
The ex-minister openly says that former Soviet colonels and generals helped Zbytek's business. According to journalists, the Czech security services follows Zbytek's actions. A forest, casino, and the Austrian border. Here is the hotel where the colonel agreed to give us an exclusive interview, but on one condition: we would speak only about tourism. During the interview, the colonel enjoys his cognac.
I bring wines and cognacs from Moldova.
In Moldova, the colonel was awarded an order by then Moldovan President Voronin, who is known to be close to the Kremlin. According to Moldova's registries, Colonel Zbytek has 2 firms there.
For 2 years, he was the chairman of the Academy of General Staff of the USSR's Alumni Club. And of course, he used these contacts for his business, especially the military ones. He really builds his business on the trade with Russia.
According to Czech registries, Zbytek has a group of companies, and 5 of them share an address with the Putin administration's property management office in a building that belongs to the Russian embassy in Prague. One of these firms is Moldvin. Milos Zeman's wife, Ivana, worked there in 2010. Another colonel's company in this building is Česká Východní. It is mentioned as an official representative of trade with Ukraine's Transcarpathia region. Registered at the same address is also a firm belonging to Timur Bagirov, former head of the Russian Alpha Group division in Ukraine and former member of the Supervisory Board of Ukraine's Naftogaz. The Czech weekly Dotek also connects Colonel Zbytek with the former Russian military officer and now governor of Russia's Sverdlovsk region, Yevgeny Kuyashev, who is believed to be close to Putin. Together with Colonel Zbytek, Zeman, during the period of his seclusion, potentially started getting support from his Russian friends with a KGB past. But the results of this friendship will be noticed by the Czechs only in 2014. 2014 goes down in history as a year when the map of Europe was redrawn by military means. Russia violates the Budapest Memorandum and officially allows itself to occupy Ukraine.
I appeal to the Council of the Federation of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation to use the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the territory of Ukraine.
The decision is made unanimously.
And to ratify the prepared agreement about the accession of the Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol into the Russian Federation. I do not doubt your support.
Czech intellectuals start drawing historical parallels.
In 1938, European countries sacrificed Czechoslovakia to Hitler. It was justified by the fact that there was a German minority living in Czechoslovakia, so Germany had the right to take back the land where the German minority lived. In 1968, the Soviet troops attacked Czechoslovakia. Europe remained silent once again. Now Russia has occupied Ukraine, and Europe is going along with it once again. However, we as Europeans think this is a disgrace.
It was the annexation of Crimea that triggered off mass protests in the Czech Republic. The Czechs start the Czech Maidan, but the protests are only against Putin. Actions against Zeman only began in the fall of 2014, after a scandal in the media about the visit of the Czech president to the Greek resort island of Rhodes. There, the Czech head of state said,
Ukraine's problems, where, as you know, a civil war has ended happily, are kind of like the flu.
The Czech president didn't stop there. He calls Ukraine a country without a real government and a possible homeland to terrorism.
NATO борется с международным терроризмом
It is necessary to fight against international terrorism. Its bases are situated in so-called failed countries, but 10 years ago, Somalia was the only failed country. Now it is Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Central Africa. Possibly in the future, Ukraine as well.
The president and founder of the forum where Milos Zeman makes this statement is Vladimir Yakunin, who is known as a close associate of President Putin.
Vladimir Yakunin, president and founder of the Dialogue of Civilizations Forum, head of Russian Railways, graduated from the KGB Institute in the USSR. Yearly salary $15 million, subject to sanctions by the USA and Australia.
Yakunin was implicated in many schemes disclosed by Russian journalists. Slan.ru shows how under the oligarch's rule, Russian railways appropriated $3.5 billion from the state budget through offshore and front companies. This is Yakunin's 15-hectare country estate outside Moscow, with a 2,000-square-meter mansion. That's according to the NGO Navalny Foundation, the Novaya Gazeta and Western investigative journalists. During the visit to Rhodes, the Czech president celebrated his birthday. According to Respect magazine, he was accompanied by his wife and 4 associates.
Dear Vladimir, dear colleagues, I have been to Rhodes 8 times, both as a retired man and now as a president.
How much did it cost the Czech budget to cover the presidential team's trip to the VIP resort and their attendance of the Russian oligarchs forum? What made the president of a European state support the Kremlin leader despite the EU and US sanctions on Russia? Within half a year, the president's press service could not make time for an interview, so we'll doorstep on them. We found out where the president would meet with his constituents. The small town of Straž pod Ralskem. The Czech president holds a meeting with the local community, even without metal detectors. And even questions from the press are not pre-screened.
How much does your trip to Rhodes cost to the budget of Czech Republic? Thank you very much.
How much what? Excuse me, I am old man, not hearing quite well. Any participation at any international conferences is covered from the budget of the office of the president. It is in the States, it is in the Soviet Union or Russia, it is in Germany, it is everywhere. Standard life, business as usual.
But the Czech president doesn't give any figures. For the president to hear the question clearly, we are following him to the next town, Mimoň. This time, the question is asked in Czech, but the president doesn't understand.
А є ще одну отазку, просим, коли стала ваша цеста на остров Родос з статного розпочту Ческа? Дякуємо.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question, but if somebody translates it, I'll be happy to answer. The conference was financed from the Fund for Foreign Travel for the President. We have taken it from the budget of the presidential administration. I don't understand why you ask me the same question twice, but if you like, come to Ralsk where I'll have another meeting with the people.
The same question is sent to the president's spokesman, Jiří Čaček. In this photo, Čaček is swimming with Milos Zeman in Rhodes, and here he confirms that all their stay in Rhodes was paid by the Russian oligarchs forum.
Dear Ms. Malcevska, all the expenses were covered by the organizers of the Dialogue of Civilizations Forum.
What sparked the friendship between the Czech president and the Russian oligarch? Why would a KGB officer keep bringing a Czech retiree to Rhodes for 7 years?
Dialogue of civilization, that is philosophy. Philosophy is the science of the sciences.
Zeman publicly talks about his friendship with the Russian oligarch and career intelligence officer Vladimir Yakunin. He admits that this friendship dates back to the times of his seclusion at the country retreat.
The friendship between them really blossomed at that time. Mr. Yakunin let Zeman know he was important for them when the majority of people didn't pay any attention to him. Now the Czech president is meeting with Mr. Yakunin. We are not talking about one accidental meeting here. These meetings are regular.
After one such meeting, the Russian Railways, headed by Yakunin, signed a contract worth $250 million with a Czech company, states Lidové noviny. That happened 8 months after the USA, a NATO ally of the Czech Republic, imposed sanctions on Yakunin. An isolated and then forgotten Zeman was most likely introduced to Yakunin by Colonel Zbytek, a graduate of the USSR General Staff Academy, who stood by Zeman even in the darkest times after his electoral defeat.
You introduced Mr. Zeman to Mr. Yakunin. Is this true?
You know, it doesn't matter who introduced whom. Of course, I am proud to be Mr. Zeman's friend. He stayed in this hotel several times. Even when his daughter turned 15, we celebrated her birthday here. I am proud to be a good friend of Vladimir Ivanovich Yakunin. By the way, he is in Prague today. It doesn't matter whom introduced whom. In my eyes, they are good friends.
Colonel Zbytek confirms close ties between himself, the Czech president, and the Russian oligarch Yakunin, Putin's associate. According to Respect magazine, initially, together with Colonel Zbytek, retired Milos Zeman used to visit Russian oligarch Yakunin in Rhodes, where, upon becoming president, Zeman was seen in the company of the head of Lukoil's Czech subsidiary, Martin Nejedly.
Вокруг него находятся люди с очень, так сказать, положительным отношением к настоящему.
The people around him have a very positive attitude towards the present Russian government, so to speak. The representative of Lukoil is Milos Zeman's advisor.
This is a list of official advisors as published on the website of the Czech President's office. According to the list, 2 official advisors of the Czech President are representatives of Russia's oil giant Lukoil, Martin Nejedly and Pavel Galushka. Both of them, through joint stock company Ana Investment, own almost half of Lukoil Aviation Czech, where Galushka is financial director and Nejedly is the head. Ana Investment is registered in the names of Nejedly, Galushka and their relatives.
Martin Nejedly, head of Lukoil Aviation Czech, head of the group of advisors to the Czech president, deputy chairman of the Party of Civic Rights.
Lukoil Aviation Czech is a subsidiary of Russian oil giant Lukoil. It supplies jet fuel for major Czech airports, particularly for the country's main one, Václav Havel Airport. According to the Czech daily Parlamentní listy, the head of the Czech Lukoil, Martin Nejedly, sponsored Zeman's election campaign. After 10 years of being a political outsider, Zeman won the 2013 election and became the first popularly elected president of the Czech Republic. In the summer of 2015, Lukoil is at the center of a financial scandal. The court obliges Lukoil Aviation Czech to return more than $1 million to the budget. President Zeman promised to fire his advisor, Martin Nejedly, if Lukoil loses this case. To date, this has not been done. On the president's website, Martin Nejedly is still listed as a presidential advisor.
Oh, his assistant is not here right now. Try to call tomorrow. Hello, we submitted a request about 2 months ago, then called back several times. Well, send it again, and if anything comes up, I'll give you an answer.
However, it wasn't just Lukoil money that helped Zeman win the election. One of the reasons why voters outside major cities supported Zeman was his ability to make people laugh and cast himself as a folksy man of the people, says Czech journalist Ondřej Soukup.
He was in volunteer exile at his cottage in the mountains in the village for the next few years, and people took a break from him and thought, oh well, he likes to be in the center of controversy.
I, just like any politician, hate journalists, especially political commentators.
But most importantly, I think it was the fact that Karol Schwarzenberg entered the second round of the elections. He is, of course, quite an intellectual, but from an average Czech's point of view, he is an aristocrat.
Karl Schwarzenberg, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the lower house of the Czech Parliament, two-time Minister of Foreign Affairs, Zeman's opponent during the elections, banned from entering Russia, aristocrat.
More people liked Mr. Zeman. It's always an election. I mean, some people liked me, but there were only 45%, and more than 50% preferred Mr. Zeman.
Karl Schwarzenberg didn't need anybody else's money for his election campaign. He really doesn't have to work at all. His family used to own parts of the Czech Republic and Austria. Head of the Schwarzenberg family is Prince Karl Schwarzenberg VII. This is one of the castles that his family owns. Everything here has been kept since the early 19th century. The only thing, it hasn't been heated for 70 years. The great-great-great-grandfather of the politician Karl Schwarzenberg I served 2 tours as Austrian ambassador to the Russian Empire. In Moscow, he received quite a few awards. This is his portrait. According to historians, Karl Schwarzenberg I had a strategic assignment in Moscow to disrupt the friendship between Russian Tsar Alexander I and Napoleon.
The story of President Zeman is quite the opposite. Before moving to the presidential residence in the Prague castle, Zeman's family lived in a regular block of flats in a residential area of Prague, while he spent most of his time at the country house. Life among common people helped Zeman gain support in the provinces. He won mainly due to Vysočina, where his country house is located, and the depressed suburbs of the Czech Republic. Czech Ostrava is similar to Ukrainian Donbass. It is a region of coal mines and steel factories. It was here that the number of votes for Milos Zeman was the highest. Whereas in Prague and other major cities, Zeman lost. Intellectual elites rejected his candidacy.
I refuse to take seriously anything Mr. Zeman says.
Why? He's a president.
So what? In this country there were many presidents that were idiots, communists, criminals. So we have another person who, in moral sense, is a criminal. He is a liar and shall be put into trial.
Martin Putner, professor of social sciences at Charles University, specialist in Russian philology, author of a satire video of Putin.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin is speaking. You can elect my best friend, Milos Zeman. He is like me. I'll send whoever I want to Siberia, and then, if I want to, I'll grant them amnesty. Besides, vodka, Milos.
Tabloids accuse Zeman of being too keen on alcohol. And Karl Schwarzenberg too keen on sleep.
Zahraniční politiky.
In 2015, Zeman's popularity increased to 46%. Sociological research of the Czech Academy of Sciences shows that Zeman is mainly supported by citizens over 60. And the reasons for that are deeper than politics, says a scholar of Russian history, Martin Putner.
Crucial point is frustration, because it's quarter of century from the revolution in 89, and of course we did many things very wrong.
That's why people elected Mr. Klaus and Mr. Zeman.
Exactly. And now, if sort of alternative appears, some persuade themselves to believe that that all is wrong, and maybe it used to be better when we were part of the Soviet Empire.
The Czech Republic experienced an economic transformation, but that was without any emphasis on the need to uphold the rule of law. This led to great disappointment among citizens. It also led to a number of privatization frauds, which in the end weakened the credibility of democracy.
Frustration and the wish for quick fixes were an easy target for manipulation, and the Kremlin grabbed the chance. Not only in this country, but across the EU, says activist Olga Malcevska.
Russia is waging its hybrid war. It is an extremely dangerous situation which can lead to the breakup of the European Union and of NATO, so then everything can happen.
Otakar van Gemund, activist, translator, co-founder of the Prague Maidan.
These are the same activists that undressed outside the Czech president's office. This protest is silent. Every Thursday, they organize a flash mob for tourists from Russia.
Prague, Václav Havel Airport. The flight from Moscow has just landed. Czech activists are holding signs with names of victims of the Putin regime. They also look forward to seeing Putin here.
I'm waiting with this sign for Putin to come, and if he comes, I will take him to The Hague. People should really realize that reality has changed.
But people's visions of reality vary.
Passerby showered me with curse words just because I stood with a card with the name Boris Nemtsov.
Activists are convinced that the reason for such a reaction to anti-Kremlin rallies, as well as Zeman's popularity, is Moscow's sophisticated propaganda. To figure out how to overcome it, the Czechs are going underground.
The most difficult part of anti-Putin protests is preparation. We've been allowed access to a secret bunker where Czech activists gather and prepare to resist Russia's influence.
Otakar, I understand you like to undress in public. No, it's just an ancient Greek bust of an athlete made out of marble, you know. It's a symbol of Western civilization, exactly what Russia is missing.
As the protesters are getting ready for the next event, we stop shooting, not to reveal their secrets. Meanwhile, at the Russian embassy, much larger actions are being prepared. This is a closed presentation of the book All the Truth About Ukraine. The so-called Friends of Russia are getting together. On the same premises, there is the Russia Club, the president of which is Zeman's friend, Colonel Zbetek. Later, the Czech counterintelligence will report that the Russian embassy in Prague is crawling with spies. But we'll speak about it later. And for now, how is Russian propaganda being spread in the Czech Republic?
This is the White Book of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's now translated into Czech and will be available to a lot of readers in the Czech Republic.
First of all, it's garbage.
Alex Kellin, head of the Czech government's National Minorities Council, editor of Russian Word magazine, son of Russian immigrants.
Mr. Kellin takes an active part in anti-Putin and anti-Zeman protests. He calls the book presented at the embassy a repeat of 1968, when Moscow sent its tanks to Prague.
As an elderly man who personally remembers 1968, I'm unpleasantly surprised by the fact that there's practically the same technology at play here. It's the same book in the same format that was published in 1968. I brought you a photo of its front page. It was published in 2 languages, just like this one.
Václav Square, or Václavák, as it is known among the locals, is Prague's main square. Right here in 1968, Soviet tanks were standing. Thousands of people were protesting against the occupation when, upon Moscow's order, 5 countries of the Warsaw Pact sent their troops here and crushed what is known as the Prague Spring.
In 1968, on Moscow's orders, more than 300,000 troops and around 7,000 tanks entered Czechoslovakia. At that time, Milos Zeman was a 24-year-old student of economics. The same year when Russian tanks crushed the Prague Spring, student Zeman joined the Communist Party. But 2 years later, he was expelled for his opposition to the invasion of Czechoslovakia by troops under Moscow's command. It was then that Zeman became an outcast and retreated into scientific work for 20 years, only to re-emerge during the revolution as a critic of Moscow and to make a political career. Then he vanished again and returned to politics as president, but this time as an ally of Moscow. How much does this friendship cost the Czech Republic? Which strategic enterprises in the country are under the sway of Moscow? And how is Russia building its network of agents in the Czech Republic and beyond across the EU? According to the Czech daily Echo 24, after the start of Ukraine's Euromaidan, about 42 websites cropped up promoting Kremlin's policy and Zeman's pro-Putin stance. That's in addition to all similar printed publications that existed before. Magazine Artek is a case in point. In 2015, for the first time, the Czech government refused to grant it license because of the statements of the publisher. Alexander Barabanov, originally from Kyiv. As we prepare to film, Barabanov refuses to stand next to the map.
This is out of date, since here, Crimea, as far as I can see, is still a part of Ukraine and not Russia as it is now. There is a family with a son and a daughter. The young daughter just got into bad company. She started a friendship with drug addicts. She started to steal money from home. What should a normal father do? Take his daughter, thrash her properly and return to the family. Now imagine that Ukraine has sucked in that Western garbage into the family of Slavic nations.
But we're in the West now. Is this what you call crap?
And you think they'll do any of it at home? The West creates garbage over there.
Why did you move here?
It was a long time ago. 15 years ago, I came to continue studying and stayed here.
Are you planning to come back?
No, actually, I think my home is here now. I considered myself a Ukrainian until recently. Since, as I already said, I know my history from more than 100 years.
And now?
And those who went from Western regions, now...
What do you consider yourself to be?
At this point, when they go in torchlight processions, I'm not a Ukrainian because I don't identify myself with these destroyers, with these murderers.
Who are you now?
I don't know, in this case, who I am.
Kremlin propaganda is more dangerous than the one we know from the times of Cold War. The old propaganda of Cold War has somehow stopped on the Iron Wall. Compared to the Cold War propaganda, the current one is actually having a mobilizing effect.
The Czech counterintelligence states,
Russia and its supporters have been engaged in white, grey and black propaganda. Russian methods for exerting influence and spreading propaganda are based on time-tested Soviet practices.
These practices are only too familiar to Zdeněk Šámal, editor-in-chief of the Czech public television, the country's oldest TV channel. As a child, he saw Soviet tanks in Prague in 1968. Years later, worked as a special correspondent of CT1 in Moscow and even wrote a book about Russian mafia. After the annexation of Crimea, he says, interference of pro-Kremlin agents became obvious.
I don't have any proof to name any specific person an agent and prove that in court. On the other hand, I'm certain that people who don't have any other job but to monitor Czech TV and to question its existence on the basis of unknown arguments probably have some sort of financial backing. And if somebody opposes Czech interests and works in the interests of another country, to me, that person is a foreign agent.
According to news portal Lumini, over the last 4 years, 11 Kremlin spies that worked in the Russian embassy have been expelled from the Czech Republic. They include former consul general of the embassy, press attaché, and 3 Russian trade representatives. The former chief of Czech intelligence, Anders Shandor, believes that half of the Russian embassy staff may be engaged in espionage.
If you look at the Russian embassy in Prague, it totals about 130 or something like staff. 75 out of them, at least the number I heard, are the technical staff. And the technical staff is one of the cover for the spies.
The Russian embassy in the Czech Republic refused to comment. According to the counterintelligence, the main tasks of Kremlin agents are to spread propaganda and control the country's top officials and energy sector. During Zeman's tenure, the Rosatom Corporation was the main bidder to complete the construction of the Temelin nuclear power plant, but the tender failed.
The tender occurred after Crimea. It would have been completely unfair to continue with that bid after all. They had an opportunity to win it before Crimea. We treated them as a normal company. After Crimea, I don't think Russia can build anything here.
So, is it a fully political decision?
No, it's just a decision.
Václav Bartuška, Special Envoy of the Czech Republic for Energy Security, a member of the Lustration Committee after the Velvet Revolution.
Russia is not a player in the Czech economy. Even in 2013, before Crimea, our exports to Russia added up to 3.7% of total exports.
Only?
We live with exports as the country. 80% of our exports go to the EU.
Right after the Velvet Revolution, the Czech Republic diversified its energy imports. It increased the usage of alternative sources fourfold and built 2 pipelines for gas and oil.
If Russia fully stops supplying gas to Western Europe, will the Czech Republic suffer?
Then I'll congratulate Moscow. The majority of gas in Europe is used for heating buildings in the cities. There is always a possibility to substitute gas with a different fuel. It would be difficult, it would be expensive, but it could be done.
The Czech energy envoy says Russia can't shut the country down. First, the government is only buying a small amount of gas and not directly from Gazprom. And second, it can also be bought on spot markets in Germany and Norway. But as our investigation proves, the gas issue in the Czech Republic is not that straightforward.
Russian exports account for most of our gas. The company that imports, which provides 15% of the gas in the Czech market, is a subsidiary of Gazprom. It's called Vemex.
We invite Dr. Vladimir Yermakov.
Vemex is headed by Russian-Belarusian businessman Vladimir Yermakov.
Vladimir Yermakov, head of Czech subsidiary of Gazprom Vemex, head of the Russian-Czech Chamber of Commerce, second richest Russian in the Czech Republic, former military officer, nicknamed Mr. Gazprom by the Czech media.
The background of Mr. Yermakov is as murky as that of Lukoil's Czech subsidiary, headed by Martin Nejedly. Before coming to the Czech Republic, Yermakov graduated from a military academy in Russia. The Russian newspaper Kommersant mentions his ties to the KGB. Vemex is registered in an office near the Russian embassy, at the same address as the Russian-Czech Chamber of Commerce and a company owned by Colonel Zdeněk Zbytek. The residence of the president used to be visited by the head of local Gazprom even before Zeman was elected. In 2012, the Russian businessman, whose past is reportedly connected with the KGB, receives an award at the Prague castle. Vemex owns the biggest chain of liquefied gas stations. In addition, the Czech utility payments are also channeled through this Gazprom subsidiary. Besides, in the Czech Republic, Mr. Yermakov owns a company producing synthetic sapphires, Alet Praha. According to the company's website, its equipment was brought from Ukraine's Luhansk Design Bureau, Donetsk. It is at this facility that the world's largest sapphire was grown in the year 2008. About 2 years ago, the workers there protested against the enterprise's stoppage over a debt dispute.
All of our requests remain unheard.
According to some sources, pro-Russian militants have moved the Donetsk facility to Russia, but the Alet Praha website makes no mention of stopping cooperation with the Design Bureau.
We called about a month ago concerning an interview with Mr. Yermakov.
Sorry, he's not here. He went on vacation. It was his last week.
Maybe just 15 minutes?
No, absolutely not.
Meanwhile, we found documents indicating that Yermakov's Vemex, Gazprom's subsidiary, got a nearly $1.5 million contract to supply Russian gas directly to the Czech president's residence, the Prague castle. And this year, Yermakov won a tender for $1,230,000.
If Gazprom is run by people who used to be the comrades in KGB, I have a problem. The fact is that Putin is able to run these strategic energy and resources companies through his comrades, through his partners from KGB, through the state administration, not based purely on the business rules. So I have a problem with that.
Out of Zeman's 3 closest associates, at least 2 are believed to be connected to Russia's secret services. Colonel Zbytuk, an alumnus of the Soviet General Staff Academy, and Vladimir Yakunin, who graduated from the Soviet KGB Academy, now Russia's Academy of Foreign Intelligence. Head of the Czech subsidiary company of Gazprom, Vladimir Yermakov, who has influence on the Prague Council in gas issues, also reportedly has a past linked to the KGB. Among the people who exercise influence on Zeman, there is head of the Czech Lukoil Martin Nejedly and its financial director Pavel Galushka, both official advisors to the president.
I'm not a Russian agent, nor a Chinese agent. I'm an agent of the Czech Republic.
Jsem agent České republiky.
How much do the Kremlin's friends cost the Czech Republic, and how come millions from the Czech budget are donated to help Ukraine, despite Zeman's pro-Kremlin sentiments?
The Prague Castle, the Czech presidential residence and the sites of national cultural heritage. In the past, Czech kings and some emperors of the Roman Empire lived here. Tourist guides say it is the largest presidential residence in the world. That's by air. But in the political life of the state, the Prague Castle is not the seat of top authority. According to the Czech constitution, the main power is exercised by the government and not the president.
It's a free country. Everybody can say whatever they want, but the government is in charge, absolutely and entirely.
The Prime Minister supports strengthening of sanctions against Russia.
If Russia decides to escalate the tensions in eastern Ukraine or in some military way tries to change the situation that exists now, this would serve as a pretext to strengthen the sanctions.
Despite the president's anti-Ukrainian slant, the Czech government, together with the NGO People in Need, are sending a humanitarian convoy to Donbass and arranged for treatment of wounded Ukrainian soldiers. 39 injured Maidan activists have received treatment in the Czech Republic. The government has allocated over $4 million in assistance to Ukraine. As to how much has been raised by volunteers, people have even lost count. Prague activists invite Ukrainian artists to share what's really going on in Ukraine. Ukraine's share of countering the Russian embassy's propaganda in the Czech Republic had to be undertaken by volunteers. Even though the Czech president is not the country's top authority, during Zeman's time in office, Russian Railways, headed by pro-Putin oligarch Yakunin, is awarded a $250 million contract with a Czech company. The local subsidiary of Lukoil does not return $1 million worth of fuel to the Czech Republic. The Czech subsidiary of Gazprom supplies almost $3 million worth of gas directly to the presidential residence. In response to the allegations of Moscow's influence, Zeman jokes.
I get paid a regular salary of 236,000 rubles per month, but I asked to increase it. You know, the ruble's exchange rate falls.
Mr. President, some Czech people wrote a letter to you. They want to present you to Mr. Putin jako vážený dárek z ruk českého národa.
Yes, I know that. Unfortunately, overwhelming majority of them are unknown people, no names. And you must understand that just the no names try for some exhibition in order to be visible.
Czech activists have gathered more than 10,000 signatures for the impeachment of Zeman. The petition is to be considered by the Senate.
In my opinion, if he and Putin have such great mutual understanding, then he shouldn't return.
Zeman for us is a puppet of Putin. For us, he isn't the president.
However, even if people do remove the Czech president from office, the Kremlin is already cultivating new friends elsewhere in the EU.
In 2014, the first Czech-Russian bank issued a loan of 9 million euros to Marine Le Pen, the leader of a far-right party in France. Marine Le Pen publicly supported the annexation of Crimea and condemned sanctions against Moscow. Also opposed to the sanctions is the Prime Minister of Greece, radical leftist Alexis Tsipras. While the Kremlin is engaged in aggression in Donbass, Tsipras flies to Moscow and makes a deal for the transit of Russian gas via Greece through the Turkish Stream pipeline. And former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi goes so far as to to meet Putin in Russian-occupied Crimea. He has been repeatedly accused of corruption and known to be a close friend of the Russian president since the time Berlusconi ran Italy's government. In one way or another, favorable attitude to the Kremlin has been expressed by Prime Minister of Hungary Viktor Orban, Serbian Prime Minister Mr. Alexander Vučić, and their Slovak counterpart Robert Fico. And even in Poland, pro-Russian Magdalena Ogórek ran for president, although failed to secure enough votes. Will the friends of the Kremlin become the fifth column of the European Union? How many are they? Whom is Moscow wooing in a bid to destroy unity of the EU and its alliance with America? Who else has been treated to, or rather tricked by Kremlin's hard geopolitical currency, gas, oil and uncompromising propaganda?